Welcome to the Tech Tides Africa podcast. My name is Kelvin, and this is the very first episode. On this podcast, we will discuss stories from around the world of technology and startups in Africa. With me on this podcast is Karen, and you'll be hearing from us quite often. Karen, how are you doing?
Hey Kelvin, my name is Karen. I sit in Nakuru, Kenya. Really excited to be with you guys. Looking forward to talking all things tech. Africa being the future, I'm looking forward to seeing how we will drive tech. So, very exciting conversations. I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely. All right, so in this episode, we'll be talking about a couple of things over the last week. In Uganda, there was a cyber attack on the bank of Uganda, and Nigeria is pushing for 70% internet penetration. Also in Kenya, we are seeing that banks are pushing for Pesalink. So first to start with the Bank of Uganda, there was a hack that resulted in about 16.8 million USD loss. The hack was allegedly carried out by a group called Waste. But the curious thing about this case is that there were officials from the finance ministry involved in this, again, allegedly. So, if this is the case, this suggests either corruption or negligence. Somehow, some officials were involved because there have been some arrests. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about this? I guess the $16.8 million question is it corruption, is it negligence, or something else?
First of all, when you look at cybersecurity statistics across the globe, you'll find that a majority of them usually have some internal involvement.
Hmm.
Either a member of staff was subject to a phishing expenditure by a hacker and they clicked on the wrong thing,
Yeah,
or a member of staff has actually colluded with hackers to steal. So I personally, my personal opinion, I think it's an inside job, especially when it comes to banking. I've
hmm.
worked in the banking space, so I know every other month your bank will be hit.
Wow,
And 90% of the time, it's an internal job. Either
interesting.
someone is doing it themselves, they're siphoning money through the system, they found a loophole, or they've colluded with someone outside and they are the link between the hackers and the bank. So I really think it's a corruption internal thing.
That's quite interesting. I guess the broader conversation is in recent years, we've seen a number of these cyber attacks on financial institutions in Africa. In fact, we wrote an article on that last year, right? So it's
Yeah.
definitely something to pay attention to because, again, we have started this year and there's just a number of stories as well. So, beyond this,
Yeah.
what can we do to secure our financial institutions?
So I think what you find with a lot of businesses in Africa is we think we're safe because we're African. There's
Hmm.
that notion that African businesses are not hit a lot of times. And so most people just rely on like a firewall or an endpoint protection and you think you're good. Last year, Cameroon Energy Company was hit, right? There was another attack by some guys called Anonymous Sudan or something like that that targeted Uganda again. Airtel was hit, MTN and Uganda Telecom were hit by these guys. I think last year also in Kenya we saw a hit on the e-citizen platform, and now there's some information that's coming out. Ransomware is like a big thing these days where they just target data, not
Yeah,
just money. So you can't really rely on just the firewall and endpoint protection anymore. Guys need to be very serious about governance and compliance, making sure your ISO certifications are on point. You're following all the international standards that are required of you. That would be number one. And then number two, you need white hackers. You need to do vulnerability penetration assessment and penetration testing. Let them come and test your network. Let them look for vulnerabilities, loopholes that a hacker can use, and seal all those loopholes as they go. That would be one of the things I think, especially people in finance and other organizations that handle sensitive data. Government is a big target for hackers and banks as well. So those are things that they should just make sure they're doing regularly. They have experts that are able to try and hack them and
Yeah.
see where there are loopholes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
because there are a lot of cybersecurity attacks these days, I think one thing that can quietly happen is kind of the wave that happened with programming in Africa, or at least in Nigeria, where these days
Mm,
everybody is a programmer because there are so many programming communities. I think the cybersecurity space is one that we can start to look into and start to create
yeah.
communities around this where people come talk about cybersecurity, sensitize people about the space and get more people interested
Mm,
in the industry. This way, in the next couple of years, we'll have a number of cybersecurity talents that can join these financial institutions as well as other industries because everyone is coming to the digital space now and contribute their skills and their know-how to making this industry better. So I think this is something that could be interesting.
that's a really good idea because I think we have a shortage in terms of experts in cybersecurity.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful. So we move on to Nigeria. Nigeria is targeting 70% internet penetration. I was surprised that this number is low at the moment. It's about 44% as at
Yeah.
December last year. The Nigerian National Broadband Alliance is aiming to expand this. Their goal is to start with a couple of states and improve the infrastructure there, which would hopefully attract investment. So, what opportunities could this present? Because I mean, Nigerian internet problems is something that I'm very familiar with, and I think this would be a very good initiative. But beyond this, what opportunities could we see if this is improved?
I think Nigeria is like one of the biggest. This is an opinion as well, hopefully an educated one. I think Nigeria is one of the biggest industries when it comes to startups, especially tech, right? In Africa, a lot of innovation is coming out of Nigeria. When we're doing articles on Startup Graveyard, you can clearly see that Nigeria is taking the lead
Yeah.
in terms of the number of startups that are coming from that country. And I think if you want to encourage that, you need fast internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at countries like South Africa, their internet speed is like 52 Mbps. Morocco, very high internet speed. Kenya as well has very high internet speeds. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing e-commerce in Kenya is doing really well because everyone is online,
I see.
including my mother in the village. She's buying things online and getting them delivered, right? And
Yeah.
I think that builds not just a better economy, it revitalizes the economy, but it also encourages development outside of the cities. So you'll start seeing rural areas become more developed because they have access to this. And
Yeah.
one of the interesting things that I think Nigeria might see is young people going back to the villages. If you have electricity and internet today, what are you doing in a city?
True. True. That's a very
Yeah.
valid point.
Yeah, and I think that's a move that we're seeing in Kenya. A lot of young people are going back to the village and just you're farming and you're working online. So even the agricultural sector is starting to get revitalized again because now young people can be interested in that because they're still connected.
Yeah.
So I think you will see with that improvement in your internet. I think one, your tech startup industry is going to exponentially grow. Two, I think you'll start to see development outside of maybe Lagos and Abuja. You'll start seeing development in smaller towns. And three, I think you'll start to see your economy begin to grow even more because you're better connected.
Yeah, definitely. And it also helps when you work remotely as well with global companies.
Yeah.
Your internet challenges are reduced because there is this notion sometimes I mean, I've been in interviews when you say you're based in Nigeria, they will ask you how is your internet connection because I'm guessing they have heard stories that your connection may not be the best. And it's very funny because even over the weekend that one of the operators here had a major issue that made the network unusable. So the backlash was really bad that they had to apologize. So it's definitely an area that needs work. And just like you said, once this is done, then it increases the opportunities out there. So
100%.
it's
Yeah.
a space to definitely watch. Moving on, in Kenya, banks are pushing for Pesalink. So, as a Nigerian, I'm not too familiar with the payment or more like the digital transaction system of Kenya. But I've heard mobile money is like the main way people send money. Compared to Nigeria, we our main way of sending money is through bank transfers. So first of all, let's touch on the current payment solutions in Kenya and why is it that banks are pushing for the integration of Pesalink?
So Pesalink is owned by the Kenya Bankers Association, which is like a conglomeration of all banks in Kenya. For a small economy, we have very many banks. I think we have like 40 banks in the country, which is really, when you look at other economies like Morocco, they're bigger than us, but they have fewer banks. And one thing that you'll notice about the Kenyan economy is we are multi-bank. You'll rarely meet someone with one bank account.
Yeah,
At a minimum, someone
that,
has three bank accounts.
that happens in Nigeria as well.
Yeah. So the Kenya Bankers Association created Pesalink to link all accounts. So I can send money from my bank account to your bank account in about 45 seconds, up to a limit of 1 million shillings. So we don't have to go through the traditional method of RTGS that takes a whole day or internal transfer that will take a few hours. I can just do it immediately. And they're trying to improve that so that there's an integration across all banks, as opposed to having each person has their own mobile banking application and there has to be an agreement between two banks for me to be able to transfer money across. So that's the aim of Pesalink.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's basically the Nigerian version of the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System that
Yeah.
integrates all
But
commercial banks.
the biggest,
Okay.
yes, 100%. The biggest challenge with this, from my point of view, is money laundering.
Mm,
So that's a big problem in Kenya because there's a lot of wash business. We call it wash, where people are
okay.
cleaning money. So the Central Bank of Kenya is very strict on providing source of income documentation. So if I go to the bank and normally I transact, let's say 100,000 shillings, and then today I'm transacting 300,000, or usually my deposits are about 100,000, and then I get a deposit of 500,000, I have to come up with proof showing where that money is coming from.
Yeah, yeah,
So I have to provide that documentation. But with Pesalink, that's not necessary. I can just transfer the money. By the time you're tracing it, it's gone.
yeah, yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge that I see with Pesalink.
Interesting. I believe banks, especially when you're integrating something as massive as Pesalink, trying to bring all these banks together, there are definitely other measures you would need to put in place to tackle some of these fraudulent transactions, which is
Yeah.
similar to what Nigeria has with
Mhm.
NIPS. So, yeah, I believe there will be measures. You can't just integrate something like that and not create some measures to tackle these challenges. So, it's definitely something that we should watch for the next couple of years.
Yeah. It also creates a really good space for hackers, don't you think?
So, what happens with the early days of a financial world, I call it innovation, is that you first see a number of hacks, and then
Mm,
people would learn better security measures, and then the system will improve. I hope this is not the case because I don't always believe you have to experience something before you learn. There are other
mm,
countries that have implemented these things before. So look at what worked for them, look at the challenges that arose, and prepare in advance for those challenges. I worked on a project one time. This was a fintech project. And we basically on the first day of launching the project, there was a hack on the system. They pulled a lot of money from the system, and we were not prepared for that. So we had to pretty much suspend the platform and try to find out what happened, how did this happen, who did this, and there was a whole lot of it wasn't the best situation to be in. So it's always better to prepare that, oh, this could possibly happen than for it to happen and then you're now thinking of a response when it has already happened.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. AI. There's a lot of AI talk in the world at the moment. And there's also some AI talk in Africa. So Flutterwave CEO has started a venture studio called Resilience 17 to invest $200,000 in AI startups. Previously, I was thinking about how would AI play out in Africa because when you look at the US, for example, especially with OpenAI that's making ChatGPT and these other tools, you see like billions and billions and billions of dollars going into investments into building these AI tools. So for me, it's how does Africa play into this? Because it seemed like you need a whole lot of money to train these AI models, and it doesn't seem like something that we are actively or largely thinking about at the moment in Africa. Definitely, there are people working on AI solutions, but it's not at scale as we can see in the West. So DeepSeek a couple of weeks ago had a company called DeepSeek released this AI model that didn't require billions and billions of dollars of investment. So it got me thinking that okay, there is a way to work on AI solutions and use a lot less of the investments that we are seeing going into the West. So that definitely gives me hope for Africa. And then I think this new venture by Flutterwave CEO is definitely a good one. So what do you think about this, Karen?
Yeah, I think as a continent, there's something Vusi says that really shocks me every time I listen to it. Vusi Tembekwayo, the speaker from South Africa, and he says
Okay.
Africa is the future, and the only people who don't seem to understand that is Africans. And in my head, I'm always thinking if Africa and AI are the future, then the two of us should be moving in tandem, you know?
Yeah,
Uh, but I think what Flutterwave is doing is the beginning of that revolution where we really need a lot of training and education in Africa for us to be at the same level with other countries that are leading the AI space. Because I
yeah,
think we have a lot of talent and I think we have a lot of very innovative people. Sometimes you look at some of the startups in Africa and it's like, whoa, you know?
yeah.
But when it comes to the actual development itself, I think we're quite a distance behind.
Hmm.
And so I think creating an accelerator program where you're able to bring in those ideas and training people into how, while you may have an innovative idea, how can you incorporate AI into it as an African startup? Those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having. And I actually believe what you said about cybersecurity, where we're creating a community of cybersecurity
Yeah,
experts in the continent. I think we should do the same for AI experts. I think it should be a bigger conversation for us where we figure out how can we drive AI as opposed to being followers of
yeah,
what is being created by other countries.
yeah. Consumerism is something that is very big in Africa. So we definitely need to be the builders. I mean, with the tech communities in Nigeria, especially, you notice that a lot of these big startups in Africa, Nigeria, their founders have ties to tech communities. And you see them be part of these communities, speak at these communities, and over time they have gone on to build all of these wonderful startups. So I think the same thing would be good for cybersecurity as well as again this AI revolution that's currently going on. That will definitely help us to become builders and not just consumers of AI.
100%.
All right. So thank you for joining us today on this podcast. It has been a very informative discussion. Karen, it's been lovely talking to you today.
It's been real.
We'll be back next week with more stories from the world of startups and technologies in Africa. See you next week on Thursday, same time, same place.